Thank you. Καλημέρα σε όλους. Happy birthday. Ποιος έχει γενέθλια σήμερα? Α, μπράβο! Χρόνια πολλά! Συγγνώμη, θα μιλήσω στα αγγλικά. Τα ελληνικά μου δεν είναι τόσο καλά. Έχω κάνει πολλά λάθη. Μια φορά παράγγειλα μια σαλάτα με μπατζούρια. Και ευτυχώς δεν είχανε. Λοιπόν, πριν... Άκου να δεις τώρα, στα ελληνικά το κάνω. Πριν αρκετά χρόνια έδωσα μια ομιλία που μίλησε για το γίνεται. Και είπα, η πιο δημοφιλές λέξη στα ελληνικά είναι η λέξη μαλάκα. Και το δεύτερο είναι το δεν γίνεται. Και είπα, και μετά τα συνδέουμε μαζί. Δεν γίνεται ρε μαλάκα. Είπα, πρέπει να πετάξουμε το δεν και να μένουμε με το γίνεται. Και μόλις ακούσαμε μια φοβερή ομιλία από τον Νίκο. Γίνεται. Συγχαρητήρια, Νίκο. Το remote μου. Λοιπόν, λίγο μετά από αυτή την ομιλία, είπα και αυτό, that Greece can be, and it should be, the west coast of Europe. Και κάποιος μου είπε, you mean the east coast? Λέω, όχι, the west coast. Δηλαδή, πρέπει να είμαστε το Καλιφόρνια, το Silicon Valley της Ευρώπης. Και γίνεται αυτό το πράγμα. Ένας δημοσιογράφος, ο κύριος Μαλκούτσης από Καθημερινή, είπε το εξής πράγμα. Είπε, it's a crazy idea, and it's just about crazy enough to succeed. Εγώ πιστεύω πάρα πολύ σε αυτό. Πάρα πολύ σε αυτό. Ο καλύτερος τρόπος να προβλέπεις το μέλλον είναι να το δημιουργήσεις. Και αυτό μόλις ακούσαμε και από τον Νίκο, με την ιστορία του. Μην το ξεχνάμε αυτό. Λοιπόν, ο παππούς μου, αυτός εκεί, στη μέση, η γιαγιά μου και μπροστά, η μικρή, η κούκλα, είναι η μητέρα μου. Ο παππούς μου έφυγε από την Ύμβρο το 1923 και πήγε στη Νότια Αφρική. Χωρίς να υπάρχει Google να τσεκάρει πώς είναι ο καιρός εκεί κάτω και χωρίς να έχει λεφτά στη τσέπη του. Και πήγαν στη Νότια Αφρική. Αυτή η φωτογραφία τραβήχτηκε το 1928. Είναι μπροστά από το πρώτο του μαγαζί που λεγόταν The Australian Cash Store. Δεν έχω ιδέα γιατί. Ήταν στη Νότια Αφρική ο άνθρωπος. Μήπως ήθελε να πάει Αυστραλία ή νόμιζε πως ήταν Αυστραλία, δεν έχω ιδέα. Ήταν πολύ φοβερό στο branding, δεν ξέρω. Αλλά αυτή ήταν η πρώτη του επιχείρηση. Εγώ μεγάλωσα στο Johannesburg, αλλά πήγα πανεπιστήμιο στο Cape Town, φοβερή πόλη. Σπούδασα Economics, Business και Marketing. Και μόλις τέλειωσα, είχα ένα πράγμα στο μυαλό μου. Madison Avenue. Ήθελα να είμαι, όπως του είπα τότε, a big deal on Madison Avenue. Αυτό ήθελα. Ο πατέρας μου είχε άλλες ιδέες στο κεφάλι του. Αυτός ήθελε να είμαι ο διαδοχός του στην εταιρεία που είχε φτιάξει. Πήγα και είπα στον πατέρα μου, «Μπαμπά, δεν είναι αυτό που θέλω να κάνω». Μου λέει, «Τι θέλεις να κάνεις?» Λέω, «Θέλω να είμαι big deal στο Madison Avenue». Μου λέει, «Πού είναι αυτό?» Τον εξηγώ 10 πράγματα και μου κοιτάει στα μάτια με ένα χαμόγελο και μου λέει, «Δείξ' τους ποιοι είμαστε». Και έφυγα από το γραφείο του με φτερά στη πλάτη μου. Και εντάχθηκα στην Νότια Αφρική, σε μια πολύ μεγάλη διαφημιστική, η McCann Erickson. Μετά πήγα στο Χονγκ Κονγκ για 2 χρόνια. Μετά μου στείλανε εδώ στην Ελλάδα, γιατί νόμιζαν πως μιλάω ελληνικά. ήμουνα CEO της McCann Erickson εδώ στην Ελλάδα. Μετά μου στείλανε Μεξικό, έμαθα Ισπανικά. Και επιτέλους, μετά από αυτό, πήγα στην Νέα Υόρκη, που ήμουνα Worldwide Director of Client Services, υπεύθυνος για την Coca-Cola και άλλους πολύ μεγάλους λογαριασμούς. Και μετά από μερικά χρόνια έφυγα από εκεί και πήγα στην TBWA, που ιδρύθηκε από Έλληνας, by the way, ο Βασίλης Τράγος από Καλαμάτα, φοβερός άνθρωπος. Η εταιρεία, η TBWA, σήμερα είναι από τα πιο μεγάλα του κόσμου. Τότε ήταν πολύ γνωστό για τη δουλειά του στο Absolute Vodka, Sony PlayStation και τέτοια πράγματα. Και εκεί είχα την τύχη να δουλεύω μαζί με τον Steve Jobs για το relaunch της Apple. Θα μιλήσω γι' αυτό, γιατί έχει πολλά μαθήματα εκεί μέσα. Και εκεί ήμουνα, big deal on Madison Avenue που λέει ο λόγος, αλλά είχα την Ελλάδα στην καρδιά μου. Γιατί γνώρισα την πατρίδα μου μερικά χρόνια πριν. Και αυτό του είπε ο Γκέτε, of all peoples, the Greeks have dreamt the dream of life best. Και νομίζω πως είχε απόλυτο δίκιο. Λοιπόν, θα μιλάω για brand, ας δούμε ένα definition. Θα το διαβάσω στα αγγλικά, όπως είναι γραμμένο. Name, term, design, symbol, or any other feature that identifies one seller's goods or service as distinct from those of other sellers. Και αυτό το έχει πει the American Marketing Association. Okay? Με λίγα λόγια μιλάει αυτό. Το σημάδι που θα κάνουμε στα ζώα μας, να ξεχωρίζω τα δικά μου από τα δικά σου. Η λέξη brand βγαίνει από εκεί. Αυτό λέγεται brand στα αγγλικά. I brand my cattle. Και η λέξη brand βγαίνει από τα γερμανικά και σημαίνει φωτιά. Γιατί το καίει. Το καίς πάνω στα ζώα. Με λίγα λόγια, μιλάνε για αυτό. Ένα τατουάζ, ένα λογότυπο. Εγώ νομίζω πως αυτό είναι, τι να σου πω, bullshit. Αυτό εκεί είναι το τατουάζ που φοράει η Αντζελίνα Ζολί στο χέρι της. Δεν με νοιάζει τι τατού έχει η Αντζελίνα Ζολί. Η Αντζελίνα Ζολί είναι πολύ πιο μεγάλο σαν brand από το τατού, το λογότυπο που έχει στο χέρι της. Όλοι την ξέρουμε, δεν είναι πολύ καλή ηθοποιό, το ξέρουμε και αυτό. Όμως όταν υπάρχει ένα meeting του G22, η Αντζελίνα Ζολί είναι εκεί. Όταν τα United Nations πηγαίνουν στην Αφρική, η Αντζελίνα Ζολί είναι εκεί. Δεν έχει ανάγκη καθόλου για τα United Nations, έχει τα δικά της. Έχει αποκτήσει παιδιά από κάθε χώρα της γης. Και η Αντζελίνα Ζολί είναι φοβερή μάρκα. Όλος ο κόσμος την ξέρει. Λοιπόν, αυτό το κάμερα λέγεται Lumix, η μάρκα. Πολλοί άνθρωποι θα σου πούνε αυτό είναι το καλύτερο από τα καλύτερα digital cameras που μπορείς να αγοράσεις. Κοστίζει περίπου 500 ευρώ, δολάρια, εξαρτάται που το αγοράζεις. Έτσι. Όπως βλέπεις, έχει ένα φακό Leica, που είναι πολύ καλό. Αυτό εδώ είναι ένα Leica. Άλλους θα σου πούνε πως αυτό είναι το καλύτερο digital camera του κόσμου. Και αυτό κοστίζει περίπου 800. Να τι λέει wallpaper. There's little need to disguise our burning passion for all things Leica. What's good enough for top photographers is certainly good enough for us too. Να όμως τι λέει το Gizmodo. They are made in the same factory. They have the same sensor, lens, LCD, housing material, embedded software, battery, and battery charger. Both take identical pictures. Yet the Leica is often described as taking warmer, smoother, somehow better pictures than the Lumix, which would be amazing given the technology is identical. Indeed, these two cameras are both made by Panasonic in Japan. Leica is licensed to Panasonic as a name. So there are the two cameras, identical. The only thing that separates them is the signature and everything that that stands for. Okay? I know all of this. Which of the two cameras do I have? Leica. Of course I've got the Leica. I wouldn't wear a Lumix badge on myself. Leica is definitely worth the additional 300 if that's the badge that you identify with. So let me talk about what brand really is. A brand is nothing more than a set of impressions that lives in consumers' minds. A powerful brand is a set of powerful, consistent, and believable impressions. Example, Leica. That, by the way, is called share of mind, and we all know that share of mind becomes share of pocket. You first got to have share of mind. The best brands are protagonists. They represent the category. Absolute Vodka, which, by the way, used to be a generic Swedish white spirit, not a vodka, represented the vodka category for many years through its brand. It should be the ambition of every brand to be the protagonist of its category. Every brand. No matter where I go in the world, if I say to anybody on this planet, soft drink, they're going to say to me, Coca-Cola. What's the Coca-Cola of cigarettes? Sorry? Marlboro. What's the Marlboro of sports shoes? What's the Nike of coffee shops? 32,000 coffee shops around the world selling expensive, not so great coffee. The Starbucks of beers. Again? Heineken. Americans will say Budweiser. The Heineken of electric cars. Easy. The Tesla of search engines. Google. The Google of computers. The Apple of your category. Guys, it must be you. This must be in your mind. Ke yinete. By the way, you've got to define your brand and you've got to define your category. And you've got to define your category in a way that you can dominate it. Starbucks dominates the coffee category, but it does so by offering an experience to its consumers that nobody matches. I want you to remember something. Every business you can think of started off as a startup. And don't forget that. Because we see these massive businesses around us and we say, well, you know, Coca-Cola is Coca-Cola. It was a startup. In fact, there's one of the first Coca-Cola bottles. That's the first pair of Nike shoes. And not so long ago. Not so long ago. There's the first Starbucks store in Seattle, Washington. Also not so long ago. There's the first Google beta site, 1998, by the way. It's not long ago. And look at that. That's the very first Apple computer. By the way, I owned one of these, the Apple II, in 1978, I believe. I sold it after a month because I didn't know what to do with it. I was checking on the internet the other day. That's worth $900,000 today. And then, of course, the Macintosh came out in 1984, which kind of changed things completely. I want to talk a bit about Apple, and my story with Apple starts in 1997. I was then working for TBWA in New York, and Apple was bankrupt. It was about to close. In fact, somebody had asked Michael Dell what he would do if he was running Apple, and his answer was, I would shut it down, and I'd return the money to the shareholders. Here's what the chief technology officer of Microsoft said: Apple is dead. We got a call from Steve Jobs one day. He wanted us to relaunch the brand for him worldwide. And I traveled to California and I went to see him and I had a meeting with him. And here's some of the stuff that we spoke about. When I asked him about his ambition, that's what he said: let's make a dent on the universe. He did not say, let's sell more computers. This is something he was very famous for, his perfectionism. Good enough is not good enough. That's what made him a very difficult guy. He was an absolute perfectionist. And that's how he thought about technology. It should be like a bicycle for the mind. It should give a human being a lot of power, but it should be very simple to use, and you never forget how to use it. We took all of that insight and made this movie.
Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them, but the only thing you can't do is ignore them, because they change things. They push the human race forward. And while some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius. Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do.
I want you to notice something about that commercial. It does not mention the word computer, not even once. It's not about selling product, it's about establishing why. It's about talking about culture. It's talking about what Aristotle spoke about as ethos. That's what it's all about. That's what the copy says. We went back and captured that spirit of Apple because it had lost that spirit, the crazy spirit. It had lost it. And we expressed this through design and technology, through architecture. Those are various Apple stores around the world. Through people, the Genius Bars. Community seminars happening in the Apple stores. By the way, the Apple stores were a huge innovation. Probably the biggest innovation that Apple had. This kind of thing was not happening in computers before that. They were sold in computer stores, which were like Kotsovolos. In fact, we expressed that in everything that Apple did. And this is the result. That's the Regent Street store in London. People queuing up in the rain to get the new iPhone. And here's a guy who's just given Apple $2,000. And he goes home and he makes an unboxing video. And he gets 12.5 million views. You'll notice that Apple does not do a lot of advertising. They don't need to. I got a MacBook. I've also got an iMac, an iPhone, a watch, an iPad, an iPod, and I use iTunes, the App Store, iCloud, TV, Apple Pay, a HomePod. And if they launch a refrigerator, I'm buying. And let's face it, if they launch a motor car, we'll all go and see it. That is one hell of a brand. The Apple timeline, very quickly. That's when we launched Think Different. Those first iMacs were launched in 1998. Nothing terribly dramatic in terms of innovation, just these colored bubble-looking computers. The first real innovation was the iPod in 2001, the Apple Store, the iTunes Store, the first iPhone, which was launched in 2007. The App Store was launched in 2008, and the first iPad was launched in 2010. Very, very important. That Think Different commercial acted as a narrative bridge, connecting where Apple was with where it wanted to be. And I think this is the most important thing for a startup, is to make sure the narrative is clearly expressed. And there's how the narrative was expressed. In 2011, Apple became the world's most valuable corporation. It's also the year in which Steve Jobs passed away. 2018, the first company to top $1 trillion in value. Remember, it was bankrupt in 1997. 2020, $2 trillion. 2022, the first company to reach $3 trillion in value. Remarkable. It was all done because of alignment, because of a human connection. Here's to the crazy ones. The people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. Which creates loyalty, and that creates the conditions for sustainable growth. What I learned at university, I was taught this, that people make products and then we build brands around them in order to provide added value, okay? With a name, a logo, packaging, promotion, que sloganakia, right? In other words, we take a product and we make it pretty, we gift wrap it, with the idea of brand as added value. What I learned at work is very different. That in the middle, you've got brand as foundational value, in other words, your shared belief system, your value system, your manifesto, and your narrative. And around that, you can do all sorts of wonderful things. Okay? Think Different is a great example. Look at all that stuff. Look at all that stuff. In other words, in the outer circle is what you do. In the middle circle is why you do it. There's a brilliant video by a guy called Simon Sinek, which I strongly suggest you have a look at. He says that people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. He's absolutely right. Start with why. By the way, everything that I know about brand, Aristotle said it 2,500 years ago. He spoke about logos and he spoke about ethos. Ethos is who you fundamentally are. It's your why. Logos is your what. We are what we consistently do. Excellence then is not an act, but a habit. And that's Aristotle. Culture. Peter Drucker says culture eats strategy for breakfast. I agree totally. That's where it all starts. Brand is something a startup cannot afford to think about. I hear this so many times when I talk to young startups, but I believe the opposite applies. Brand is something a startup cannot afford not to think about. Brand is the narrative bridge which connects where you are with where you want to be. And by the way, when you're a startup, and we know this very well, you're at point A, you want to get to point B, it always looks like a nice straight line. But as Nikos showed us a little earlier, it actually looks more like this. Because underneath that is that, and we only discover that while as we're busy working. And it's always there. It aligns people as they join you on an uncertain journey. That's what brand does. And I love this statement. People who support a startup make an explicit decision to forego stability in exchange for the promise of tremendous growth and the excitement of making immediate impact. Remember something. B2B, business to business. In my opinion, that is absolute rubbish. Every time I hear that expression, B2B, it makes me crazy. 100% of employees are people. 100% of customers are people. 100% of investors are people. And the same applies to bankers and suppliers and regulators and distributors and to everyone else who might affect the future of your business. Everything. Business must be 100% focused on people, their needs, their hopes, their aspirations. And the way to do that is with your why, your ethos. It's all about P2P. There's no such thing as B2B. It's people to people. This over here is from Dieter Rams, famous German designer, and I love that statement. He says, indifference towards people and the reality in which they live is actually the one and only cardinal sin in design. The same applies to brand, in fact, to everything you do. When I was at university, I was left with the impression that if you become a marketing director, you become a conductor of an orchestra. I realized how wrong I was. There's no script for this music. It doesn't exist. There's no music score. It's jazz. It's all jazz. You never play the same song in the same way. You can't. There's no way. But it's always unmistakably your song. Your way. You got to know your music well, and then you have to let go of everything you know and just go with the music. Marketing like jazz. And I think marketing is like jazz, especially in today's world. One last thing as I close. I gave an interview to Süddeutsche Zeitung a few years ago, and all of a sudden this journalist asked me the following question. He said, are Greeks Europeans? And I said, what's wrong with this guy? Doesn't he understand that Greece is like the basis of European civilization? And then I realized what he was actually asking me. What role do we play in the modern world? And here's what I said to him. I said, we'll never be good Germans. But we must become exceptional Greeks. Left brain, right brain. That's exactly what startups need. It needs the craziness to be a crazy dreamer, but it needs that process to make things happen. Action, 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 as Nikos said. You need hard skills, but you also need soft skills. And you need these in combination. There's some words in Greek which I absolutely love. They don't exist in other languages. Philotimo, philoxenia, meraki, metro, anthropia, ethos, kefi. Wonderful words. And probably my favorite is this word over here. If you're English, enthusiasm, you don't know what it means unless you understand exactly what the word means. En theos, or theos apo mesa. Wow. There's never been a better time to be Greek. And I really do feel this. I mean, what I'm witnessing right here today is quite remarkable. This wasn't happening a few years ago. But I want to remind you, it's time to be Greek. Γίνεται. Thank you very much indeed.